What's up guys, welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Riddell, and in today's video we cover an absolutely brutal attacking option for you d4 players against the move knight f6 with the Trompowsky attack of bishop g5. And this move in particular is very difficult for the King's Indian Defense type player to deal with. For example, if we play a normal looking move like c4, which by the way is completely okay, we have to be prepared for moves like c5 with the Benoni Defense or e6, looking to potentially play bishop b4 with check, reaching Bogo-Indian or Nimzo-Indian type ideas. But one of the main options here for black against a move like c4, knight f3, g3, etc., is reaching that King's Indian Defense type game with g6, bishop g7, d6, castling kingside, reaching a very aggressive setup in which they can fight for the king side of the board and fight for the win. But guys, we can stop one of the strongest openings in all of chess in a single move here by playing bishop g5. Whole idea being, if black does play g6, we now have the option of just taking that knight right off the board, and all of a sudden we gave up the bishop pair, but we damaged black's pawn structure, and there's just not going to be the same amount of power behind the King's Indian attack. In fact, it no longer exists. We can now play a move like e3, and against bishop g7, never hurts to throw in a move like h4, trying to play h5, which would really give us some leverage on the king side of the board. So I recommend that black pushes the pawn here with h5. But against this, we now have the key idea of playing knight e2, eyeing that f4 square. And notice here, black can fall into trouble very quickly if castling kingside. This seems like a very normal move. It seems like the king has a lot of protection, but we now play this move g4, attacking the pawn on h5. And look, black does not want to allow us to take on h5 and give them isolated and double isolated pawns with an open g file against this very weak king. So you're probably going to see a move like h takes g4, but against this we're going to continue to push with h5, looking to take on g6 and then play this move knight f4. Notice here, if black takes on h5, we can simply take back with the rook and then play a move like knight g3, putting pressure on g4. We're going to get our queen and bishop involved. This is just not good news for black if they take on h5 and try to hang on to that extra pawn. And as mentioned earlier, let's say black plays a move like f5. We're going to capture on g6 and then play knight f4. But notice here, guys, we're not just threatening this pawn on g6. For example, if a move like queen f6 is played, it does stop this threat, but we now have a second threat of bishop c4 with check, attacking this king. And notice how a normal move like king h8 or king h7 cannot be played because of our rook on this h1 square. And now following the move rook f7, which is more or less forced, we could take the rook, but we could also play a move like queen e2, even f3, trying to break this game open a little bit. This pin is not going anywhere anytime soon. And guys, the more developmental moves we can get in while forcing black to play very awkward chess trying to get out of the pin, the better. Right? I mean, if we play moves like f3, queen e2, black is going to have a very cramped game. We're going to keep the tension, and then at the very last moment, capture that rook, and guys, we're simply going to be winning that game. So y'all, that is a potential option for you Trompowsky attack players against g6 to simply take off that knight, and all of a sudden the King's Indian Defense type player is no longer able to play their opening. If you don't want to take the knight on f6, you could just continue here with a move like knight f3 and just play natural chess. I mean, if a move like bishop g7, play knight d2, trying to eye this potential e4 idea, which is very strong. And if a move like d5, trying to stop it, okay. We play e3, we then play c3, and notice here we have a pawn pyramid, but we no longer have a bishop on c1. Oftentimes in positions like this, our bishop gets trapped on c1 and d2, which is okay. Some would argue that this bishop really holds the fort down, defending b2 and e3, but some other players prefer having the bishop active and in the game on a square like g5. It really just depends on what you prefer, having this bishop on g5 or having this bishop on c1, but this is a very good idea and a very good plus when it comes to the Trompowsky attack. I mean, here if a move like knight bd7, we can just continue to develop with a move like bishop to d3 or even bishop e2, and after a move like h6, bring that bishop back to h4. I'm not really too worried about g5 because we play bishop g3. It may seem as if black is trying to get some kind of attacking chances, but they're pushing pawns in front of their king, and if anything, these pawns are just going to become big weaknesses later on in this game. So y'all, that covers the move g6, in which case, yet again, we can play normal chess or even play bishop takes f6, and you've stopped one of the strongest openings in the game of chess. against d4. Now, what if black plays a move like d5, just expanding in the center of the board? Well, yet again, we have the option of just taking that knight right off the board and damaging black's pawn structure. This is very easy to play as white. I mean, we're just going to play moves like e3, and now against bishop d6, play c4, putting pressure on d5. Usually in a position like this, black would want us to move our bishop first and then take on c4. That way we lose a tempo. But guys, right now the best move for black is to take this pawn and allow our bishop right into the game, because if black plays a move like c6, we're able to take on d5. And no, this position isn't losing by any means, but we play knight c3. And notice here, guys, we as white don't really have any weaknesses, but black does. They have some kinks they have to work out. They have double pawns on the f-file and an isolated pawn on d5. And here's white. We have options like queen b3, putting pressure on d5 and b7, or even g3, fianchettoing this bishop on g2 and attacking that centralized pawn. This is very uncomfortable for black to play with and very natural and easy for the white side. However, yet again, guys, against this move d5, we don't have to take this knight and then just play normal looking chess. There's actually a pretty fun option against this move d5, and that is playing this maneuver of e3 and then continuing with moves like knight d2 and bishop d3. And some of you are probably wondering, okay, why aren't we just playing knight f3 and then castling kingside? Well, we're not playing knight f3 yet because we want to play f4, now reaching a Stonewall Attack type position, prepared to meet c5 with c3. And usually in the Stonewall Attack, we have a bishop on c1. But now with the Trompowsky Attack, we got our bishop out first and then made this very strong pawn structure. If a move like castling kingside here, we can just continue to develop our pieces, eyeing that very key e5 square. And here, if a move like h6, you can take the knight or play bishop h4. I'm not really convinced that one is better than the other. We have castling kingside ideas on the way. Very easy and very comfortable position for white here in this game. So guys, that covers the move d5, in which yet again we can capture on f6 and then continue with moves like e3 and c4. Very easy and simple game for white. On top of that, against this move, we can continue with moves like e3, knight d2, bishop d3, and eventually prepare this f4 move with a Stonewall Attack type game. What happens if black goes, look, I'm not trying to play a quiet move like g6 or d5 and just allow white to take my knight. What if I play the move c5? Well, here I don't really recommend capturing this knight on f6 against the move c5, because now after g takes f6, we continue with d5. And by the way, us playing this is completely okay. It has been played at the master and grandmaster level. So again, it really just depends on what you prefer. But I personally don't really like facing this move of queen b6, because we now have some issues that have to be worked out. We gave up our bishop on c1 and our pawn is advanced all the way up to the d5 square. So now if we play a move like b3, which seems very natural, we now run into f5 with bishop g7 on the way, and it feels as if white is the one backpedaling in this position. Likewise, against this threat of black just winning a pawn, we could play the move queen c1, and yet again black could continue with f5 and bishop g7, putting a ton of pressure on our game. But we could also run into this move bishop h6. Whole idea being, if we win this piece, well, we're going to lose a pawn, and not just the pawn, but also our rook. This is not a good idea. So we're forced to play a move like e3, in which case black is now able to play f5. And if you plug this into a computer program, it's going to tell you that white has the slight edge. But from a practical standpoint, I mean, black has moves like e5, d6, and f4 on the way, a very active bishop, an active queen on b6, pouncing down on the b2 pawn. For me personally, this is just not very comfortable. So all that to say, guys, you can take this knight on f6. It's far from losing, but I personally don't think that it gives white a very active game. I prefer pushing the pawn to d5 up the board. But yet again, we got to worry about this move queen b6. How do we prep for this threat of black taking on b2? Some players prefer playing bishop c1, but I personally don't really see why any Trompowsky Attack player would be excited by reaching a position like this. Let's just think about it this way. We started the game in the starting position, right? I mean, that's usually how it goes. What has changed, though, since the start of the game? Well, our pawn on d2 has been pushed all the way to d5, and that is it. Everything else looks the same. While from the black side, black now has a pawn on c5, knight on f6, queen on b6, and it is their move. I just don't see why white would be excited to reach a position like this, where they've literally moved one pawn and have given black all this development. Instead of this move bishop c1 retreating the bishop all the way back, I'm going to recommend a very aggressive line and a very fun line for white, and that is knight c3 with the poison pawn variation. Now look, if black plays a move like d6, we'll continue with e4, but whenever black does decide to take on b2, we have bishop d2 ready at a moment's notice. Some of you may be wondering, wait, why are we giving up a pawn just to play a move like bishop d2? Well, guys, notice here if black plays a quiet move like g6 or even d6, we now see a major threat from white, and that is rook b1, forcing the queen to a3, and then knight b5, attacking the queen and threatening knight c7 with check, simply winning that rook on a8. And notice here black cannot play queen a5, because of that key bishop d2 move. This position is resignable for black. So y'all, this bishop d2 idea may seem passive, but it's really not, because of this rook b1 followed by knight b5 threat, and white is going to go on to have a one game if we can reach that variation. So here black is smart to just get the queen the heck out of there by playing a move like queen b6, but now we're going to continue with e4, just simply taking full control of the center. Notice here we'd love to play the move e5, forcing this knight all the way back home to g8. And if black stops this with a move like d6, we're now going to continue with aggressive chess f4, expanding on the king side. If a move like e5, white does have the fun variation of f5, which leads to a very interesting and fun attacking game. And if a move like g6, we notice that black falls into trouble very quickly. Again, e5. A key idea here, attacking the knight. If black plays the best move here of knight f d7, we now play rook b1. And against a move like queen d8, I didn't include queen c7 because this runs into knight b5, attacking the queen again. We're now going to play knight f3. And guys, black can lose this game very quickly if they're not careful. For example, what about the move bishop g7? Black just trying to get their king out. Well, guys, we're not going to let this happen. We're going to play the move e6, attacking the knight on d7. And once black takes the knight, we're going to continue with knight g5. Look, black doesn't want to allow us to get this knight on e6, attack the queen, and attack the bishop. And once we see a move like knight f6, we're now going to play bishop b5 with check, ready to meet bishop d7 when knight takes e6 yet again, because notice after bishop d7, this bishop couldn't take the knight because it would be pinned to the king on e8. And if a move like king f8 here, we're now simply going to continue with d takes e6 with knight f7 ideas on the way, and we don't have to worry about a thing because every little thing is going to be all right. So guys, that covers the move c5, in which case I don't recommend taking the knight on f6 against this move specifically, but instead taking space with d5, and against a move like queen b6, continuing with knight c3 with the poison pawn variation, bishop d2 ideas in the air. And guys, we're going to have a very fun chess game ahead of us. But what happens if black goes, look, I'm tired of all these bishop takes f6 ideas against moves like g6, d5, c5. I'm just going to continue here with the move e6, prepare to meet bishop takes f6 by simply capturing back with the queen. Well, I must admit that against the move e6, I no longer really like bishop takes f6 from the white side, because here we're kind of just giving up the bishop pair for no reason, right? I mean, we're not damaging black's pawn structure. We're simply going to see the move queen takes f6, and black's wondering what on earth we're trying to do. But this move of e6 does give up something, and that is e4, the center of the board. Here we're playing the big center variation, taking full control of the center of the board. Notice here, knight takes e4 is not an option unless they want to lose their queen. And the main line here for black is h6, but let's cover a couple of different options. What happens if you're playing this and your opponent just plays a move like bishop e7, reinstating the threat of capturing on e4? Well, now we're just going to play the move knight d2. If black wants to play quietly here with moves like d6 and castling kingside, we're more than okay with that. We're going to play moves like bishop d3, potentially even f4 and knight f3 followed by castling kingside. We have a very easy and active game. And if black does fight for the center here with a move like d5, we're now going to play e5, kicking this knight back. And now white has a couple of different options. We can keep the bishops on the board with the move bishop e3, but I personally diagonally, kind of like capturing this bishop off the board, and then continuing with c3. And notice here after c5 and knight gf3, it's almost an improved French defense from the white side. Usually in the French, in positions like this, there is a queen that is able to come to b6 and a bishop on f8. But notice here we give up our bishop on c1 for the bishop on f8, and the queen is now on e7. I think both of these changes are for white's best advantage. And here if we move like b6, we're just going to continue with bishop d3, castle kingside. We have no complaints. So y'all, if black plays a quiet move like bishop e7, we're simply going to continue with knight d2, and white has a very natural and easy game. What happens if black tries to play actively here with a move like c5? Well, now we as white are going to expand in the center with d5. By the way, I don't recommend playing a move like knight f3 because then black can take on d4, and this is kind of giving me Sicilian defense type vibes, except that we as white have a very loose position there, right? I mean, if we play knight f3 and then take on d4, we kind of have a bishop hanging out there, a pawn on e4 that can't be taken yet, but it is attacked, and black is going to have queen b6 and especially queen a5 check idea. So here I'm recommending not letting black take on d4, but instead play d5, expanding in the center, taking some space. And now if we move like d6, we have a very easy game. Knight c3, protecting those central squares. And now if I move like bishop e7, we could even play bishop b5 with check, trade off those minor pieces, continue with knight f3, castling kingside on the way. Our center is not going anywhere anytime soon. And as you guys know, I'm going to say, we're just playing chess. So y'all, following this variation of e6, e4, and then c5, don't allow black to take on d4, but just expand in the center of the board, continue with moves like knight c3, and we're going to have a very easy game. What about the main line of h6, attacking our bishop? Well, guys, it's kind of interesting. At the master and grandmaster level, there has been 2,713 games in this position, and every single one, white has played the same move. The reason for this is that if a move like bishop f4 or e3 or really any of these back squares, black simply wins the pawn on e4. If we play the move bishop h4, black then plays g5 and then takes the pawn on e4. So here we have to take the knight on f6, but here, guys, I'm actually okay with it. I did not like taking this knight immediately, but notice here black had to play this move h6, and in the meantime we were able to play e4 and now can play natural moves. I personally kind of like playing knight c3 followed by queen d2, and the purpose of queen d2 is two-sided. First off, we want to castle queenside, and we would also love to get in this f4 move. I mean, if a move like knight d7 is played here, we have a pawn on f4, e4, d4, knight f3 on the way. Very nice game from white. e3 attacking the queen, absolutely fantastic position. And if a move like g5 stopping this f4 move, we can now just castle queenside. I think the one move that deserves some attention, at least initially, is queen f4, because this does force a queen trade, but we're more than okay with that, because after queen takes and pawn takes, notice that black's pawn structure is very overextended and they are very underdeveloped. None of their major or minor pieces even leaving the 8th rank, and we're now able to play knight ge2. If e5 trying to defend the pawn, we have knight d5 with knight takes c7, knight f6, and taking this pawn ideas. This is just disastrous for black. With such an underdeveloped position, you don't want to play a move like e5 and allow things to break open. The best try here for black is actually h5, whole idea being that we can now actually fall into the trap of taking on f4, because then black is able to play bishop h6, pinning our knight to the king, and then after a move like g3, playing e5, we just lost ourselves a piece. So here we're not going to take the pawn, but just play king b1, reinstating the threat, and the second that black defends this, continue now with g3. Look, if black wants to play f3, we're going to play knight g1 and say thank you for the pawn, and if a move like f takes, okay, we'll play h takes g3, attacking this pawn on h5, and again, black's pawns are just too far extended. We're about to win this one on the h-file, and guys, we simply have a huge edge here. So again, y'all, I'm not really too worried about queen f4. We just take the queen, play knight ge2. If needed, play king b1. These pawns are too overextended. We are up in development, so we want to break that game open with a potential g3 and continue to play active and aggressive chess. What happens if black sees this and doesn't go with this move and plays a move like bishop g7? Well, now we're going to continue with the key idea of g3. And by this move, guys, we're not really trying to stop queen f4. That's not why we're playing this. In fact, as we just covered, we're completely okay if black tries to trade queens and damage their pawn structure. We're instead playing g3 to prepare the future f4 idea for ourselves. Expanding on the king side, there's been quite a few games at the professional level here, much of which following the move knight c6, which at first sight does seem very intimidating, black putting a ton of pressure on our centralized d4 pawn. But now we just play the move bishop b5. Very natural, very easy move, pinning that knight to the king. And now if a move like bishop d7, play knight ge2, developing our last minor piece on the first rank and defending that centralized pawn. And now if a move like a6, that's okay. Just take the knight right off the board. Continue now with f4. We now see the purpose behind g3. We have a huge center in this position, a ton of potential pawn moves on the way. And guys, black can lose this position very quickly. The queen is very awkwardly placed on f6. Black does have the bishop pair, but if we navigate this position correctly, I personally, from a practical standpoint, would prefer the white side. So y'all, we've so far covered 4 moves in this video, and we have one more to go with the main line. We've covered g6, in which case I recommend taking that knight. The same goes with this move d5. And we could just take this knight, continue with e3, c4, very natural game, or even go into a Stonewall Attack type position, but with our bishop on g5. We've also covered this move c5, in which case I recommend d5, and e6 does stop us from taking this knight on f6. But it simply gives us full control of the center, and we're going to have a very natural and easy game. The main line here for black at the master and grandmaster level is knight e4. Black going, look, I don't want you to take on f6, and I don't want you to even think about it. I'm going to play knight e4 and simply threaten to win your bishop. And now as white, we really have 2 options. One of them is playing h4 with the raptor variation, expanding on the king side. Kind of a weird but very fun line, in which case we fight aggressively for the win. And I honestly think that it deserves its own video. So I'm going to be releasing one on that tomorrow in the morning, and I'll leave a link to it at the end of this video. But y'all, to finish this main video on the Trompowsky, let's cover the main line of bishop f4, simply dropping this bishop back. And now as white, we really need to be worried about 2 things. In general, we need to be worried about if black plays aggressively with a move like c5, attacking the center, or if they play more of a quiet option, like the move d5. Let's first cover this move c5, putting immediate pressure on our pawn. Well, against this, we're now going to waste no time in playing f3. We're not really worried about black bringing their knight to f6. In fact, if black does do this, we can just take that pawn right off the board. And now if a move like queen a5, we could continue with knight c3 with e4 ideas in the air, but we could also play this fun option of queen d2, making it so that this queen on a5 cannot be comfortable. Black's going to have to trade here or capture the pawn back on c5. If they do take on c5, we can now play e4, followed by knight c3. We have castling queenside, g4, bishop e3, and knight ge2 ideas all in the air. We're up a ton of development, and we're about to play some very fun and aggressive attacking chess. So again, y'all, if knight f6 is played, just take the pawn on c5, and after queen a5, we have either queen d2 or knight c3 options with a very easy and smooth game. What happens if black plays this move queen a5 with check? Well, now we have to be very careful. The best move, and it's not even close, is playing this option of c3, in which case black will now bring their knight back to f6. And in this case, I don't recommend taking on c5. Why is this? Just a second ago, I was recommending that you take it, but now I'm not, because after queen takes c5, we now have a more awkward game. I mean, before we had a knight on c3, queen on d2, and pawn on e4. But now with our pawn on c3, our position is a little bit more cramped and a little bit more awkward there, and black has more freedom. So here we have a couple different options. I personally like pushing with d5 down the center of the board, again, taking space. And now against queen b6, we have a couple of different options. In this position, I'm actually a lot more comfortable with playing bishop c1. Earlier, I wasn't, because we had pawns on c2 and f2, but now we have a little bit of momentum because of these knight e4 and queen a5 check moves. In fact, e4 is just one move away, so I am more comfortable with this line. If you still don't want to play the move bishop c1, that is completely understandable for you aggressive and attacking players. There's a very fun line here for white, and that is e4, expanding in the center of the board. Notice how strong of a pawn chain this is. And here if black takes on b2, we're going to continue with knight d2, giving black a second pawn But we now play bishop c7, and all of a sudden, this queen can't really find a home. This queen is very awkwardly placed, and now if a move like d6, we're going to gain a tempo on it by playing knight e2, and we're going to continue to chase this queen around. If a move like queen e3, we have knight c4. If a move like queen d3, we have rook b1 and rook b3 on the way. And here if queen e5, we have knight c4, followed by a move like rook b1. We are down 2 pawns, but with a very aggressive and attacking game, very active pieces. And to say the least, guys, if you like gambits and giving up some material to get that attacking edge, this line might be for you. So against the main line of knight e4, in which case we responded with bishop f4, if you see this move of c5, waste no time in playing the move f3, continue to follow the lines and variations showed, and you should be more than okay. What happens if black just plays more quietly here with a move like d5? I mean, these are very normal, very strategic looking moves. I mean, knight e4 attacking the bishop, d5, black just trying to play normal chess here. We as well are just going to continue to naturally develop our pieces. We could play a move here like f3, but I personally prefer the option of just continuing now with an option like e3. Just continuing to develop our pieces. And now if a move like c5, we can continue with bishop d3, putting some pressure on this knight. And now if black takes the pawn on c4, we could take this knight on e4 and then play queen takes d4. That is a good option, trading down queens and just getting a natural and easy to play game. Another option is just taking back with the e-pawn, prepared to meet queen b6, putting pressure on both d4 and b2 by simply taking off that knight and then continuing with knight c3. Again, in general, guys, we're okay with giving black this pawn on b2. They've spent quite a bit of time in doing this, and in the meantime, we as white have got an edge in development. We're going to play knight ge2. The reason I don't like taking on e4 is because it runs into f5, attacking the knight, and potentially c2 once this knight gets out of the way. So let's just play knight ge2. We have ideas here like castling kingside, rook b1, capturing the pawn on e4. And guys, sometimes in chess, we get good positions, and sometimes we get bad. This is one of the good ones. If you'd like to learn the theory behind the Raptor attack, that very fun h4 line for white, click the video to the left. If you'd like to learn how to play the Blackmar-Demer Gambit, a very fun option for you aggressive d4 players against the immediate move d5, click that video to the right. Leave a comment down below to let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.